What if books could change your brain without any grammar rules? Comment below. Do you still translate in your head when reading English? I remember sitting in my room with an English book in my hands. I looked at the first line. Then I looked away. My brain was tired. I read the sentence again. This time I tried to say it in my language. I translated every word, slowly, one by one. It felt like carrying heavy bags up a big hill. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't understand the story. I only understood the meaning of words, but not the meaning of the page. That day, I closed the book and thought, maybe I'm not smart enough for English. But something inside me didn't give up. I wanted to understand English. I wanted to think in English. Not just read it, not just say the words. I wanted to feel it. I just didn't know how. The next day, I found a very simple English story. It was about a boy and his dog. Only 3 lines on the first page. Very short, very easy. I decided to try again, but this time I made a rule. I will not stop. I will not use a dictionary. I will not translate. I will just read. I said to myself, I will follow the story like a child. So I read the first page. I didn't understand every word, but I understood what was happening. The boy was sad. The dog was missing. I felt something in my heart. My eyes moved to the next page. Still no translation. Still no dictionary. Just reading. Just feeling. And then something strange happened. I forgot that I was reading English. I forgot that these were not words from my language. I saw the story in my mind like a movie. I saw the boy looking for his dog. I saw him run across the street. I saw him cry under a tree. I felt his sadness, his worry, his hope. That was the moment I stopped translating. I didn't mean to. It just happened. Because I was inside the story. I was not thinking about the grammar. I was not thinking about the rules. I was just thinking about the boy and his dog. And then I smiled. I understood the full page without translating. Not every word, but the meaning. And that was more important than anything. I realized I don't need to know every word to enjoy the story. I just need to keep reading, keep following, keep feeling. That night, I thought about what happened. I didn't know I was training my brain, but I was. I was teaching my brain to understand English without using my language. That is how babies learn. That is how I learned my first language, and that is how I will learn English too. From that day, I read more stories. I found simple books, easy English, fun stories. I chose stories that made me feel something. I stopped using my dictionary. I stopped translating. I just read and guessed the meaning from the story. At first it was hard. Sometimes I didn't understand anything on a page, but I didn't stop. I read the next page, and sometimes that helped me understand the one before. It was like a puzzle. Piece by piece, things became clear, and my brain became faster. I noticed something else, too. I started thinking about the story in English. I didn't say, "The boy is sad," in my language. I said it in English, inside my head. He is sad, I thought. He misses his dog. It was small, but it was powerful. I was starting to think in English. That night I told my friend, I think I'm finally learning. He said, "You look happy." And I was. Because something had changed. Not outside, not on paper, but inside my brain. That was the day I stopped translating, and it all started with one small book. And from that moment, I wanted more. I wanted to read more stories. I wanted to see how far this could go. I didn't want to learn like a student anymore. I wanted to feel like a real English speaker, and that's when something truly magical happened. The next morning, I went back to the book. I wanted to read it again. But this time, something was different. I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel stuck. I felt excited. I wanted to know what happened next. I didn't think about grammar. I didn't think about rules. I only thought about the boy and his dog. I turned the pages slowly. I read every sentence. I listened with my eyes. The story felt real. It was like I was there, standing beside the boy, helping him look for the dog. I felt his pain. I felt his fear. I felt his hope. And I realized something that surprised me. My brain was not fighting anymore. My brain was enjoying it. I was not forcing the language. The story was pulling me in, like a rope pulling a boat closer to the shore, gently, naturally, without pain. That night, I thought again, why was this happening now? Why did it feel so easy? Before, I had studied English for years. I had taken notes, memorized rules, filled notebooks. But nothing worked like this. One small book, one small story, and suddenly my brain was listening. And not just listening, it was understanding, not through translation, not through grammar, but through emotion. That was the secret. That was the key I had missed for years. When I studied English like a subject, my brain stayed cold. When I felt English like a story, my brain opened like a flower. After that, I wanted more. I found another book. This one was about a little girl who wanted to fly. It was simple. It had pictures. I didn't know every word, but I knew how she felt. She was scared of the sky, but she dreamed of touching the clouds. I turned the page and saw her building wings. She tried, she failed. She tried again. She smiled. I smiled too. I didn't need to translate. I didn't need help. The pictures helped me. The feeling helped me. The story helped me. My brain didn't care about the meaning of every word. It cared about what was happening. And because of that, I was thinking in English without even knowing it. That's when I started to believe in storytelling. I believed stories could teach me more than any grammar book. I believed I could train my brain to stop translating. And it was working. I would read a page and then close the book and think about it in English. Not perfect English, not long sentences, but enough. She is happy. She is flying. She is brave. These thoughts came to me without translation. They came to me like drops of rain, quiet, natural, software, but very real. I was feeling English inside me, not outside. One day, I met a friend who was also learning English. I told him, "Don't read English with fear. Read it like a child. Read it like magic." He smiled, but didn't understand at first. Then I gave him the book about the flying girl. The next day, he came back with tears in his eyes. He said, "I didn't know learning English could feel like this." I told him, "It's not about the words. It's about the world inside the words." From that day, stories became my teacher. Not a strict teacher, not a boring teacher, but a kind, smiling one. One who didn't shout when I made mistakes. One who didn't ask me to remember big rules. One who simply said, "Come in. Let me show you something beautiful." And I went in. Every day. Every night. I read more. I dreamed more. I thought more. And with each story, my brain became more free, more natural, more English. People around me began to notice. They said, "You're speaking better. You look more confident." But I didn't feel like I was working hard. I felt like I was watching movies in my mind. Movies made of words, English words. And those words were no longer strangers. They were friends. They were part of me. I was not studying English anymore. I was living it. And the more I lived inside these stories, the more my brain changed. It started to do something I never thought possible. It started to understand without help. One night I sat with a new book in my hands. It was a story about a boy who lived on an island. The words looked longer. The sentences were bigger. I felt nervous again. My eyes searched for a word I didn't know. I found one on the first line. I wanted to stop. I wanted to check my dictionary. That's what I always did before. But this time, I stopped my hand. I whispered to myself, "No dictionary. Just read." I took a deep breath. I looked at the page again. I didn't understand the new word, but I understood the rest of the sentence. I guessed the meaning. Maybe it meant tree. Maybe it meant rock. I wasn't sure. But I kept reading. And soon, the next sentence helped me. The boy sat under it. The boy touched it. Now I was sure it was a tree. My brain smiled inside. It had solved the puzzle without help. That night, something changed forever. I saw that I don't need to understand every word. I only need to understand the story. Just like when I listen to my friends. Sometimes they speak fast. Sometimes I don't catch every word. But I understand what they mean. That's enough. The same is true for reading. I don't need to stop for every word. If I stop, I break the story. I break the feeling. I break the magic. But if I keep going, the story carries me forward. It tells me what I need to know. It holds my hand. It whispers, "Don't worry, just keep walking." So I started a new habit. I stopped using a dictionary while reading. I only used it after reading, and only for one or two words. Not for all, not for every line, just for the words that came back again and again. I made a small list. I wrote the words I saw many times. I didn't write their meanings in my language. I wrote them in English, with pictures, or with simple English sentences. That way, I stayed inside the English world. I didn't jump back and forth between two languages. I stayed in one place. That place was English. This small habit changed everything. My reading became faster. My understanding became deeper. I enjoyed the story more, and I remembered more too. When I read with a dictionary, I only remembered the meaning of the word. But when I read without it, I remembered the feeling of the whole page. I remembered what the boy did, what he felt, what he said, and that made the words stay in my heart, not just in my notebook. One day, I met another learner. She told me she didn't read books because she didn't understand the hard words. I smiled and said, "You don't need to understand the words, you need to understand the story." I gave her one of my old books. I said, "Just read, don't stop, don't translate, just feel." A week later, she messaged me. She said, "I cried at the end of the story. I didn't understand every word, but I felt everything." That's when I knew she was also changing. Her brain was learning the real way, the emotional way, the natural way. Later, I found a new book. It was about a girl who wanted to be a dancer. It had many new words, hard words. But I didn't stop. I followed the story. I followed her dream. And again, the story helped me understand. I didn't need a teacher. I didn't need a dictionary. The book itself was teaching me. Each page was a small lesson, not a grammar lesson, a life lesson, a lesson in thinking, feeling, and understanding in English. I kept reading every day, even just one page, even just 5 minutes. Some days I was tired, some days I didn't want to read, but I reminded myself, this is how I learn. Not by forcing, not by memorizing, but by feeling the words, seeing the story, living the page. And because of this, something new began to happen. My brain started making pictures when I read. Not translations, pictures, emotions, sounds. This was real English. This was deep learning. This was the beginning of something even bigger. And that bigger thing came to me one night, when I closed my eyes and saw English in my dreams. That night, I closed my eyes like always. I was tired, but happy. I had just finished a story about a brave girl who saved her village. The words were still fresh in my mind. I didn't translate anything. I just read, felt, and understood. I turned off the light and fell asleep. But something strange happened. In my dream, I was standing on a hill. I was not alone. A girl stood beside me. She was the same girl from the story. She looked at me and said something. In English. I was surprised. I answered her. In English. We talked. We laughed. We ran through the village. Everything was in English. The trees, the people, the sky, the voices, all English. But here's the most beautiful part. I didn't know it was a dream. It felt real. It felt natural. I didn't stop to think, what does she mean? I just answered, like I had always spoken this language. In the morning, I woke up slowly. My eyes opened, and for a few seconds, I didn't move. I was thinking about the dream. And then it hit me. I had spoken English in my sleep. My heart beat faster. I sat up. I smiled. I felt something deep inside. My brain had changed. Something had shifted. Without a teacher. Without a classroom. without any grammar book, only through stories, through books, through feelings. My brain was starting to think in English, even while dreaming. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The rest of the day, I felt proud. I felt peaceful. I told my friend, "Last night I dreamt in English." He looked at me like I had told him I flew to the moon. He said, "That's amazing." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "It means my brain is learning, not memorizing, not copying, but learning in the real way, deep inside, where dreams are made." After that, I began to notice more changes. Small ones, but powerful. When I saw a tree, I didn't think of the word in my language. I thought of the word tree. When I felt hungry, the first word that came to my mind was hungry, not the word from my mother tongue. English was now the first voice in my head. I was still learning, yes. I was still making mistakes, yes. But something inside had become free. I was not trapped in translation anymore. I was walking inside the language. I wanted to understand why this was happening. So I searched online. I read articles about the brain. They said something amazing. When we read stories with emotion, our brain doesn't just read. It lives. It feels. It creates pictures. Those pictures stay longer than words. Those feelings stay longer than grammar rules. And when we sleep, the brain organizes these feelings. It puts them in dreams. That's why I had that dream. That's why I spoke English without fear. Because my brain was telling me, "You are ready now." From that day, I became more serious, but not in a boring way. I became serious about reading stories that touched my heart. I stopped reading books just to learn words. I read to live another life. I read to feel what others feel. I read to go to places I had never been. And that feeling of dreaming in English kept me going. It told me that my learning was not fake. It was real, deep, powerful. Even my voice changed. I started speaking softly to myself in English. I would walk around my room and say simple things. "Today is a good day. I like this book. I feel happy." These were small sentences, but they came from inside, not from a grammar rule, not from a translation, but from my heart. And I knew it was all because of the stories that helped me forget I was studying, the stories that entered my dreams, the stories that made English a part of my life. And slowly, my world began to change. I no longer felt like a student of English. I felt like a user of English, a lover of English, a person who lives in two languages. One of them is my own. The other one is English. And books gave me this gift. But it didn't stop there. Something even more powerful happened next. Something that made me understand English not just with my mind, but with my heart. It was a rainy afternoon. I was sitting near the window with a book in my hand. It was a sad story. A girl had lost her best friend. I didn't know every word on the page, but I knew what was happening. She was crying. She was alone. She didn't know how to live without her friend. I read slowly. My heart felt heavy. I didn't think about English. I didn't ask, "What does this word mean?" I just felt the sadness. It came into my chest like a wave. And I realized something. That feeling, that emotion, it didn't need translation. It was clear. It was true. And in that moment, I wasn't just reading in English. I was feeling in English. That's when I understood. My brain was learning a new way. It was not focused on grammar. It was not focused on rules. It was focused on emotions, happiness, pain, fear, joy. These feelings have no language, but they teach us every language. When I felt the story, I thought in English. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. My brain didn't have time to translate. It just reacted, like it does in my own language. Like when I see someone smile, I smile too. That's not translation. That's connection. And that is the heart of fluency. I started looking for more books that made me feel something. I found a book about a boy and his grandfather. The boy asked simple questions. Why do people get old? Why do people go away? The grandfather answered with love and wisdom. Their conversations were short, but powerful. I didn't just understand the words. I understood the love between them. I didn't translate those feelings into my language. I just felt them as they were. English became more than words to me. It became a doorway to emotion, to human stories, to real connection. I began to notice the same thing in other parts of life. When I watched English movies, I didn't read subtitles so much. I watched the faces, I heard the voices, I felt the emotion, a mother hugging her child, a man saying goodbye, a friend laughing at a joke. These were not English moments. These were human moments. And because of that, I could understand without perfect English, because my heart understood first, and then my mind followed. I think this is why storytelling is so powerful. It teaches you without pain. It teaches you without pressure. It just gives you feelings, and your brain learns from those feelings. I didn't plan to think in English. I didn't force myself to stop translating. It just happened. Because the stories gave me something real, something I could feel. And that made the language feel natural, alive, like my own voice. One evening, I sat alone and thought about my journey. I remembered the days when I couldn't even say hello. I remembered the nights when I used to cry because I didn't understand anything. And now, I was thinking in English. Not all the time, not perfectly, but freely, calmly, naturally. My thoughts came in English when I wasn't trying. I would say, I'm tired, or this food is good, or I miss that book, not to show off, not to study, but because my brain was starting to live in English. And I knew why. Because I had stopped chasing grammar. I had stopped running after perfect vocabulary. I had stopped translating every line. Instead, I had let stories enter me. I had opened the door to feeling, and when that door opened, everything became easier. Everything became lighter. My fear became smaller. My confidence became stronger. And I started to believe maybe English is not just a subject. Maybe it is a feeling. And that feeling helped me find friends I never knew I had. After I started feeling English, something even more special happened. The people in the stories, the characters, they started to feel real. Not like paper people, not like actors. They became my friends. I knew them. I waited for them. I missed them. I laughed with them. I cried for them. I followed their lives. When they made mistakes, I wanted to help. When they smiled, I smiled too. And I didn't even notice that I was thinking in English while I did all this. These characters didn't speak my language, but they spoke to me, deep inside, in a way no textbook ever could. There was one girl named Emma in a story I read. She was shy. She didn't talk much. She wanted to make friends but didn't know how. She reminded me of myself. The way she looked down, the way she walked slowly, the way she stayed quiet in a noisy room. I understood her. I didn't need to translate anything. I just knew. I felt like she was sitting next to me while I read, like she was my classmate. And as I kept reading, she changed. She found her voice. She stood up. She spoke. And that gave me hope. If Emma could speak, maybe I could too. And just like that, her story became my story. Every book brought someone new into my life. A brave boy, a funny girl, a kind teacher, a silly dog. These were not just characters. They were real people to me. I remembered their names. I remembered what they said. I remembered their voices, their dreams, their sadness, their secrets. And because I loved them, I listened to them with care. I read every line like it was a message for me. And without realizing, I was listening in English. Not for homework, not for a test, but for love, for friendship, for feeling. I didn't have many English-speaking friends in real life, but I didn't feel lonely because I had these friends in books. They spoke to me every night. They told me stories when the world was quiet. They were patient. They never laughed when I didn't understand. They didn't care if I read slowly. They were always there, waiting on the next page. And when I finished their stories, I felt a little sad, like saying goodbye to someone you care about. I would close the book and whisper, "Thank you." One day, I told someone, "I think the reason I speak better now is because I have so many friends in English." They laughed, but I was serious. These characters taught me how to speak, how to feel, how to think. Not by giving me vocabulary lists, but by showing me life. Real life, love, anger, laughter, fear, joy, pain. And they used simple English. English I could understand. English that stayed in my heart. Sometimes, I even copied them. I repeated their lines. I used their sentences in real life. When someone asked me a question, I answered like one of the characters would. I used their words, their style, their rhythm. And people noticed. They said, "You speak like a native." But it wasn't magic. It was because I had been living with native voices for a long time. Inside books, inside pages, inside dreams. This made my learning feel human, not like school, not like a language app, but like friendship, like listening to someone you trust, like spending time with someone who makes you feel safe. That's what the characters gave me: safety, confidence, courage. And so I kept reading. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to meet more people, more friends, more voices, And with every new story, my English became softer, deeper, warmer, not just correct, but real. And when my English became real, I felt ready for the next big step, to create a daily habit that would change my brain forever. After meeting so many characters in my books, I wanted more. More stories, more moments, more English. But I didn't want to feel lost again. I didn't want to stop and forget everything. I needed something strong, something I could do every day, like brushing my teeth or drinking water. I needed a habit, a reading habit. So I made a small plan, not a big one, not something that needed 3 hours or a perfect study table, just a simple daily reading routine, something I could do even when I was tired, even when I was busy, something I would enjoy. I told myself, just 10 minutes a day, that's all. I chose a time, after dinner, before bed. I made it special. I didn't sit at a desk. I sat on my bed. I kept a soft light on. I picked a book that made me feel something. I didn't choose hard books. I chose simple stories, easy English. I didn't read to become smart. I read to feel good, to relax, to enter another world. I made a rule, no dictionary while reading. I could check later if I really needed to, but during those 10 minutes, I was just inside the story. Some days I read more. Some days I read just 1 page, but I never skipped it. Even 5 minutes was okay, because I wasn't counting time. I was building a habit, a peaceful habit, a happy habit. My brain started to expect it. When I sat down with a book, I felt calm. I felt focused. I felt like I was doing something kind for myself. It wasn't study. It was love. For the story, for the language, for my dream. I also started reading out loud, slowly, softly, just for myself. I didn't worry about pronunciation. I didn't care if I made mistakes. I just wanted to hear the English sounds from my own mouth. At first, I felt shy. Even alone, I felt silly. But then I remembered how children learn. They copy sounds. They speak without fear. I wanted to be like that. So I read the story aloud like a child learning to talk, and slowly, my mouth became more confident. My voice became stronger. I started to enjoy hearing myself speak English. Another part of my routine was writing 1 sentence after reading. Just one. Something I felt. Something the story gave me. For example, after reading a sad chapter, I wrote, "I feel sorry for the boy. He is brave." After a happy one, I wrote, "This story gives me hope." I didn't try to be perfect. I didn't use big words. I just wrote what was in my heart. And those small sentences became my way of thinking in English. Not forced, not translated, just true. Every weekend, I looked back at my week. I asked myself, what did I read? What did I feel? What did I learn? I didn't test myself. I just talked to myself like a friend. I said things like, "That story about the bird was so sweet," or, "I remember how the girl ran through the rain." These small talks helped me remember more. I didn't forget the stories. I didn't forget the words, because I had felt them, and what we feel, we don't forget. Over time, my routine became my favorite part of the day. Even when I had a bad day, my book waited for me. Even when I felt alone, the characters were there. Even when I felt tired, the story gave me energy. It became my safe space, my English world. And that small 10-minute habit did more than any big lesson ever did. And something magical started to happen after a few months. One day, I was watching a movie in English, and I noticed something. I was not reading the subtitles anymore. I was understanding everything with my ears, and I knew this routine had opened a new door. I still remember the evening clearly. I had just finished reading a beautiful story about a teacher and her students. It made me smile, and I felt proud of how much English I had understood. After reading, I wanted to relax. I opened my laptop and started a movie. It was in English. I chose it without thinking too much. I just pressed play. The subtitles were on, like always. But a few minutes into the film, something strange happened. I wasn't looking at the subtitles anymore. My eyes were watching the characters, my ears were listening, and my brain, it was understanding. I paused the movie. I sat still for a moment. I asked myself, did I really just understand all of that, without reading? I played it again, this time with no subtitles. At first, I was nervous, but then the voices became clear. The words were not slow, but they didn't feel too fast anymore. I could follow the meaning. I could feel the mood. I could understand the jokes, the emotions, the pauses. I smiled. My eyes filled with tears. Not because of the movie, but because I had waited so long for this moment. I had dreamed of this, and now it was real. I didn't do it with grammar books. I didn't do it with flashcards. I did it with stories, with reading, with feelings. My brain had trained slowly, quietly, in the background. All those nights I read before bed, all those days I read out loud to myself. They had built something strong, something invisible. I had not noticed it growing, but it was there. Now, when I heard English, I didn't translate. I didn't panic. I just listened. I just understood. After that day, I watched more movies and videos, and each time, it got easier. My ears were not scared anymore. My brain didn't freeze. I didn't say, "It's too fast," because now I knew that speed was not the problem. It was about practice. My brain had been practicing with every story, with every voice in the book, with every sentence I read and felt. And now it was ready to hear English in the real world. And the amazing part? I started to hear words I had only read before. They came to life. Words I had seen in books now had sound, now had rhythm. I remembered how one character in a story used to say, "You're kidding," in a funny way. And when I heard it in a video, I smiled again. I know this, I thought. I've read this line. It felt like meeting an old friend in a new city. I also started to copy the way people spoke in the movies, not just the words, the way they said them, the emotion, the rhythm, the pauses. I watched short scenes many times. I repeated the lines. I acted like the characters. I wasn't just learning English. I was living it, feeling it, becoming it. I was training my ears and my mouth at the same time. I shared this with my friend who was still learning. He said, "I always get scared when people speak fast." I said, "I used to feel the same, but now it feels like music. You don't need to hear every note to feel the song." That's what reading had done for me. It had trained me without pressure, without fear. And because of that, I was finally free to listen like a native. And now, something beautiful was happening. I didn't just understand when people spoke fast. I started to speak faster too, naturally, not with stress, but with comfort, with flow, like a river that doesn't stop. And I knew I had become someone new, not just a learner, but a thinker, a listener, a speaker. And I had one final step to take. Because now it was not just about reading books. It was about thinking like a storyteller. It started with reading a simple book. Then came the feelings, the characters, the dreams, the sounds, the listening. And now I had become something I never thought I could be, a story thinker. I no longer read English like a student. I didn't look at every sentence like it was a test. I didn't stop to check every word. I didn't try to remember every rule. I read to feel. I read to understand. I read to live another life. And something amazing happened. I started thinking in English, but not just thinking with words, thinking with stories. When something happened in my life, my mind didn't think in my first language first. It thought in English. If I was tired, I heard a voice say, "I need to rest." If I saw something beautiful, I thought, "This is wonderful." If I felt nervous, I remembered a line from a book, "Be brave, even if your hands shake." These thoughts were not from a textbook. They were not from a grammar lesson. They were from the stories I had read. And because of those stories, English was now living inside me. I began to write short things in English too, not perfect things, not long essays, just thoughts, feelings, sentences that came to me in the moment. Today was a quiet day. I miss that story about the sea. Maybe I'll read one more page before sleep. These were not written to show anyone. They were just mine. They were soft, true, simple. And when I wrote them, I realized I was not just using English. I was thinking like an English speaker. The way I saw the world was changing, and that change had come not from studying, but from stories. I started to enjoy silence more, because in the silence, my thoughts came. And those thoughts were often in English. I didn't fight them. I welcomed them. I let them grow. I let them speak. And they became part of me. I remembered one day I was walking home and it started to rain. Instead of feeling annoyed, I remembered a line from a story. Sometimes the rain is not a problem. It is a poem falling from the sky. And I smiled. Because that thought came in English, and it felt beautiful. I knew then that books had given me something much bigger than language. They had given me a new way to think, a new way to see the world, a new way to feel life. I didn't just speak English now, I lived with it. I carried it with me, and it made me softer, kinder, stronger. It made me listen more, observe more, feel more. It made me a better version of myself. Sometimes people ask me, what is the best way to learn English? And I always say, find a story that touches your heart. Start there. The words will follow, the grammar will follow. But first, feel something, and the rest will come. Because that's what happened to me. I didn't start with grammar. I started with a story about a lost dog. And that one story changed everything. I still read every day, not because I have to, but because I want to. I still write small thoughts. I still talk to the characters in my head. I still think about that first dream in English. And I smile, because I know something most people don't. You don't need a classroom to speak English. You don't need a perfect accent. You don't need to memorize hard words. You just need one thing: a story. A simple story that you can read, feel, and remember. A story that becomes your friend. Because when you feel the story, you stop translating. And when you stop translating, you start thinking. And when you start thinking, you start living in English. Just like I did. If this story touched your heart, write in the comments, I will start my story today. Tell me the name of a book you want to read, or one that changed your life. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, because someone out there is still translating, and your story might help them stop. Let's keep learning English, not with pressure, but with love. One story at a time.